Hello and welcome to Check 1 2, where we give you the lowdown on testicular cancer by talking to survivors, advocates and supporters of testicular cancer awareness here at the world famous podcast studio Glasgow. Our next guest is Chris Chree, and at just 15 years old, Chris faced a life-altering diagnosis of testicular cancer, an experience that shaped her journey in a profound way. Now Chris not only stands as a cancer survivor, but also a passionate advocate of testicular cancer awareness. Chris's story is not just one of navigating a testicular cancer diagnosis while in high school, but also his sexuality around that diagnosis as well. So, ladies and gentlemen, Chris Chree.
Oh yeah, well, I was listening to your one with the other day, Terence. Is it Terence?
Yeah.
It was so I wasn't prepared for an American accent.
And it had like a thick American accent as well, you know. He was honestly, such a lovely, down to earth guy, as everybody's been, you know. I think it's like anything that happens, like, I think having cancer changes you a little bit to be just that little bit more easygoing, because you're like, well, I could have died at one point, so I'm not.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So you're like, more chill.
More chill.
Yeah, it puts things into perspective.
100%.
Yeah.
So if you just want to kind of introduce yourself a little bit, tell us a bit about your background, testicular story, and then we'll just chat off the back of that.
Yeah, so, I mean, I'm Chris. I was diagnosed when I was 15, so really quite young. When I was diagnosed, they were saying that it was quite unusual for someone of my age to get a testicular cancer. It's not uncommon, but it's still quite unusual, which was quite nerve-wracking, I think, as well at the time, looking back. And yes, so that was back in 2010. So July just passed was my 14-year anniversary of being kind of in complete remission, which is great.
Yep.
I remember for my 10 years as well, I raised a bunch of money for cancer research and stuff like that to kind of commemorate it and things. And yeah, it's something that I talk about quite regularly and quite openly now, because it's important to have those conversations and making sure people are kind of checking themselves and things like that. So it's something I'm always it's on my radar and I'm always talking about.
Yeah. I mean, navigating a cancer diagnosis at any age is difficult, but at 15, like, how was that? You know, obviously, you would have been completely blindsided by it for a kickoff, but how was that for you emotionally, looking back on that?
I mean, looking back, so I remember I can so clearly picture getting diagnosed. I remember being just in the hospital room. I'd been there for about 5 or so hours. I'd had blood tests, had scans, ultrasounds, all that sort of thing. I remember the doctor coming in and being like, "Oh, it's cancer." And I just remember it's like one of those scenes that you get in a movie where everything else just mutes out and you just hear this like humming noise and people are speaking, but you're not paying attention to what anyone's saying. I remember my parents were crying and I was just completely numb. I think at the time I was just in such shock. Looking back, I think I just wasn't fully aware of what that really meant, because at such a young age, like, you're aware of what things are when you're a teenager, but the gravity of a situation, I think, doesn't hit you as much when you're as a teenager, because you've not lived that full life yet. You've not had a lot of life experience, especially when you're 15. So I remember being so just in shock and a bit in denial about it as well. And I remember just not really believing that it was true, and just complete shutdown, state of shock, but then also just like the state of denial. Just kind of went back to it, like having had a paper round and everything, the typical thing you have when you're in high school. You go to school, you come home, you do your paper round, you give everyone the evening telly, whatever. I remember the next day I just went and did it and whatever, and my dad came with me, he was like, "Are you okay?" And I just didn't have an answer. I was like, I don't know. It's just, I don't know how to navigate this. I don't know how to process this. Nothing up until that point would have prepared me for something like that. And it's the same at any age. Nothing really would prepare you at any age to be told you have cancer. There's no way to process or to prepare yourself for a doctor saying those words to you.
Yeah.
But I think when you're so young and you don't have a real understanding of life and what cancer is and how to navigate the world and things like that. It's a lot. And I was already at a stage where I was really kind of understanding what my sexuality was. Like I was going through that journey already as well. Like I'm attracted to guys, blah, 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 blah. And then that hits you on top of that and you're just like, oh,
Yeah.
it's a lot for anyone to handle. But when you're 15, it's a lot to handle.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And when you're 15 and you are kind of going through this hormone transition anyway, you know, to be then have that almost kind of taken away as well, is difficult. Did you tell the school and things like that, and did the people around you at school know?
So I told kind of a couple of the teachers at school, like your guidance support and things like that. Luckily, well, not luckily, but when I was diagnosed, it was just coming to like near the end of the school year anyway. I was diagnosed in April, and I had my surgery in around May time and stuff like that. So it was coming to the end of the school year anyway. So it wasn't major. I was like, I'm not going to be in. This is what's happened. Blah blah blah. I didn't have the conversation. I was there for them.
Right.
Don't really remember them, but it was more my parents facilitating that. They're like, and I was just sitting there like, I don't know what to say. Like I was just still in shock for months. And yeah, told a couple of my close kind of circle and things like that. Didn't really want it majorly broadcasted because, you know, what it's like in high school, everybody gossips and that sort of thing. And I remember a few months probably after I'd had my surgery and things like that, I'd walked across like the Tay Bridge in Dundee for Maggie's Cancer Centre in Memmeglan and stuff like that to raise money for that. And there was a newspaper spreading an article in the Evening Telegraph in Dundee, and then that came out on the Tuesday, and then on the Wednesday, because everyone's mum and their gran and whatever got the Evening Telegraph. So then on Wednesday, I remember I was in the cafeteria at school, just sitting there with my friends waiting for the day to start, and I saw everyone just like, that's him, that's he had cancer, blah, blah, blah. And I could see everybody gossiping about it and like pointing and staring and things like that, and it's really overwhelming. So at that point, more people knew, and I had that bigger network of support with my friends, but I'm glad I didn't really address it with anyone prior to that because everyone would gossip and stuff like that, and I just would have really been so blatantly overwhelmed, especially because I was still having surgery and that still would have been scheduled, whereas when everyone did find out publicly, I had already went through kind of the surgery and was in remission and things like that, so I was a bit more settled and a bit more at ease with it all. But I remember because I was off school for ages, I remember I bumped into someone and there was like loads of rumours as to why I was off school because it wasn't like me. I was real nerdy kids. I was like prefect, head boy, all that sort of stuff. So it wasn't like me to be off school. So I remember I bumped into someone who was like, oh, there's loads of rumours why you're off school. Some people would say you're sick. Some people will say you went on an extended holiday, blah, blah, blah. And I was just like, oh. I just flat out just didn't say anything. I was like, oh.
Right.
Because looking back, it was no one's business, but everybody wanted to know everybody's business.
Yeah.
Typical high school, isn't it? Like everybody wants to know everything and everyone does know everything and then it just spreads like wildfire.
And also having that as well as, you know, going through that process, you know, you're coming to some kind of conclusion with your sexuality in high school. It must have been hard enough. Then add this in.
Yeah, exactly. Because like looking back, like this is like 14 years ago, and obviously for people who are gay, transgender, lesbian, queer, and stuff like that, it's still really difficult to be that in high school or to be that just generally, especially with the kind of socio-political climate there is. But to like even 14 years ago, it was so much worse. So looking back, I always kind of knew, but I didn't want to give more fuel to the fire of being bullied and things like that. So I just never I always suppressed it.
Right.
And things like that. Like even with the cancer, like this is horrible, but people would bully me for that as well, which is just so crazy to think about. Like you've got teenagers going through cancer and stuff like that, and then they're getting bullied for it. It's like so crazy. So there was just that such abundance of things I was experiencing: puberty, cancer, questioning my sexuality, and then just high school life. You know, you've got exams, you've got hires, all that sort of stuff, and you're just like,
Yeah. Just a wall of hitting you, essentially.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It would be a lot for anyone to deal with. Like, it would be a lot for me to deal with at this age, never let alone, like, I'm almost 30 now, and it'd be a lot for me to deal with now, let alone 15. I kind of don't really know how I managed it.
Yeah.
Like, looking back, I'm like, how did I get through that?
Well, that's what I was going to ask. You know, it's like in terms of even just your cancer diagnosis and the treatment at 15, was there any support offered to you in terms of like psychological supports and things like that to make you? No, it was just you were just there. You go,
thrown at it. Yeah,
yeah.
I was quite lucky with the cancer diagnosis because my body was still developing and things like that. I noticed really early on that something wasn't right, because it's that age-old thing. You know your body better than anyone. And I think that's very true at any age. But I knew really early on that something wasn't right. And I've had like hernias and stuff in the past, so I really just thought it was something like that because I was prone to them when I was younger anyway. So I was like, I'm not really feeling well, let's go to the doctors. Went to the doctors, and she was like, that's not right. Went straight up, like fast tracked to the hospital, was there for like 5-6 hours, and then it was all in like the one day. Like, I'd left school at lunch, went to the doctors. They weren't happy, so went and picked up my mum from work, went to the hospital, was there till about 6 in the evening, and then that's when I kind of got told. And I remember the moment up until getting told. I kind of remember getting told, and then the next thing I remember, I was at home. I just completely shut down, phased out, just don't really remember the journey home, nothing like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, there was no real psychological support offered when I was younger. Nothing really like that.
Yeah.
There was like, you get like your pamphlets and stuff that you get. It's like, oh, here's some like support groups if you want, or here's some like your information packets and pamphlets and whatnot, but nothing that would have been substantial enough.
Yeah. Which is something that you see as adults going through it. You know, it's like when I've talked to the other guests that we've had on, some have been, you know, early 20s. You know, you're obviously the youngest person who was diagnosed in terms of the age you were diagnosed at. And again, you think, oh, maybe it's because you're adults, they maybe think you've got those support networks, and that's fine. But as a 15-year-old kid, you would have thought there would have been more input from, especially because it's easier to get that type of input technically.
Yeah.
You know, when you're under 16, and it's a shame that you weren't. Do you feel that it would have been helpful, or did you think that you managed to navigate it all right?
I think that's so tough to say. I think I definitely managed as best I could. I had like friends that I could support that had supported me and things like that. I had my parents. I have a really close relationship with my parents, which was nice, and things like that. Probably I could have benefited from it a lot more. I had a lot of, probably for like the years that followed up until like my early 20s, I had a lot of unresolved resentment and a lot of things that I didn't realize I was feeling until I went into therapy in my like early 20s, like early mid-20s. I was like talking to like my therapist and stuff like that, and there's a lot of things that came up, and I was like, oh, like this like light bulb kind of clicked that these feelings that I've been holding on to since then that had impacted relationships and how I navigated life and all that sort of stuff without even me realizing that that's what it was doing. So I think it probably would have been better to have someone to navigate those feelings with. But I think because I was so scared at the time of kind of coming to terms with my sexuality and coming to terms with the cancer and just general puberty and things like that, I don't think I would have been at the age where I would have fully appreciated it anyway.
Yeah.
Because you know what it's like with teenagers, you try to get teenagers to talk about their feelings, like, no.
Yeah.
Like, I'm just going to, like, I don't want to talk about it, like, whatever. So I think, although it would have been good, I don't know if I would have really utilised a service like that as much as I could have when I was younger. I probably would have just bottled it all up and just been like, no, I'm fine.
Yeah.
Like, it's fine, I don't need this, like, whatever. When I'm like looking back now, I'm like, oh, I needed that.
Yeah.
I needed the therapy. I needed the support.
And it's funny because like, again, you know, even as I was 30 when I was diagnosed, and you know, I think that looking back, I didn't get anything, and maybe I should have pushed, because again, you just kind of go head down, we'll just ram through this and then it'll be fine come the end. And actually, you know, like, I'm kind of getting, well, hopefully going to be getting input for psychological services at some point, you know, because there is maybe a lot I didn't unpack at that time, you know. And I think even in somebody who was in their 30s, you know, and having that as being 15, I really can't, I don't think I would have coped at 15, you know, knowing who I was at 15, I don't think I would have coped that well. So
yeah,
it's amazing that you got through it.
Yeah, there's just a lot of things I think that I realised about how I navigated situations when I was younger. Like when I was speaking to therapists and stuff like that, and I was like, oh, why was I going through things like that? And I really kind of, like, speaking again about like my sexuality, I remember when I was speaking to my therapist a few years ago, and like, because obviously there's nothing wrong with being gay and things like that, and there's still a lot of people that disagree with that statement. They're like, oh, gay isn't okay, blah, blah, blah. And even back then, it was a lot harder and things like that as well. It's not easy now by any means, but it's come a fair way since I was like a teenager. But I remember looking back, and when I was speaking to my therapist and talking like that, I remember looking back and thinking, oh, wow, this kind of cancer diagnosis is like a judgment from the universe for my sexuality, because I was still really not understanding what gay meant. And there was all this paraphernalia and talking about it on, like, it wasn't mainstream in the way it was talked about. It was always like, this isn't right, it should be man and women, blah, blah, blah. And I remember being like, oh, I've been sentenced cancer because I'm gay.
Right.
And I remember that wasn't realization I made until I was in my like mid-20s, when I was speaking to my therapist and stuff like that. And it's like, why did I think that? That's one, ridiculous. 2, gay is absolutely fine. It's completely normal. And 3, it's so crazy that we lived in a world where that was where I was feeling. I think the fact that I was bullied for having cancer as well really kind of like amplified that. And really that's why I kind of didn't come out until after high school, is because I was like, I don't want to give people more reasons to attack me, bully me, whatever, and things like that. So it was kind of crazy navigating all that mentally, and I don't really know how I had the mental capacity to do it. Because if I had to do that now,
Yeah.
I don't think I would be doing it. But I think it's because you're so unaware of the world, and when you're a teenager, you are in your own little bubble in a way. And I think having gone through that at that age, being in my own little bubble protected me in a way, kind of shut everything else out in a way, and I kind of just dealt with it and got on with it. It's like anyone these days is just like, oh, I'll just get on with it. Like, it's whatever, I'll just get on with it. And that's, well, it's not healthy just getting on with it. Like, it is important to talk. But that's, I think, where my head was at.
Yeah, I think as well, like, navigating your sexuality within all that is massive as well. I mean, the fact that it's you know, especially when we talk to guys, and a lot of the input that they got from if they were younger, because I didn't get a prosthetic.
Years out.
Did you not? So
I got offered one, but because of my age, they were like, oh, you will have to wait till your body's fully developed and you've gone through puberty fully and all that stuff before you're even offered one. And I did then get offered one. I think it was like, again, early 20s. I was like, I'm not going through that. Not going through that operation just for a purely cosmetic point of view. Yeah. When at that point, I don't even remember what it's like to have it. Do you know what I mean? I just like if someone was like, oh, do you miss having to? It's like, I don't remember what it was like. Like,
I barely got the chance to enjoy having to, really.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I have, for as long as I can remember, it's just been the one. I can't remember what it would feel like to have to, anything like that. Yeah. So I just didn't even bother with prosthetics. Yeah. It's like, when I first got diagnosed, I was like, oh yeah, like I'll probably definitely get that. But then, like, you're talking like 6-7 years later, I was like, no. Yeah. It's a lot of effort. Yeah. Going through that operation, like, because I remember when I had my operation and I got discharged and whatnot, and just trying to walk was just an absolute nightmare. Like, walking upstairs, just walking in general. I was like, nah, I'm doing
Yeah.
that again.
It's like I was walking like this. I was like 45 degrees
Well,
everywhere
I
I
remember when
went.
I got home, when I got to my parents' house, like after I got discharged, and I was walking up the stairs, and there's not that many stairs. There's like probably about 14 stairs in my parents' house, and I was like, and I was like, I'm not coming back down them again. No, if I want food, someone's gonna need to bring me it because I'm not doing that.
Get a little bell.
Yeah, I was like, ding, 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 please help.
Yeah.
It was a nightmare.
Yeah. But even with and that again, I think, discovering who you were as a person, having one testicle and discovering your own sexuality is a lot to ask anybody anyway. So like you say, the fact that, I didn't realise that you wouldn't get offered that because you hadn't developed properly. I thought it just would have been like everybody else. So that's interesting to know. And like I say, I learn so much when I'm doing this podcast. I didn't realise that. It kind of makes sense, but you sometimes hear the advice that other guests have been told, and it's, you should take one because you want to tell potential partners this in your own terms, but you were never really even given that choice because you had to wait, and then
exactly.
Yeah.
And then I was just at that point where I was like,
forget it.
I just can't even be bothered now.
Yeah.
Like, it is what is part of me now. I'm just like, or it's not part of me because it's gone. It's in medical waste. But I was like, nah, I just can't be bothered.
Yeah, or as my pals would sing to me, mine's apparently in Albert Hall, so because Paul has only got one bottle.
But yeah, like going through that stage of puberty, like I always think about, because I was at the stage where like your balls are dropping and all that sort of stuff, but because mine in the bin never properly descended and all that sort of stuff, so it's like, I always but I always think about how my life would have been different if I hadn't had it, if I hadn't cancer, blah 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 blah. But in a way, I'm glad I went through that experience. I think especially such a young formative age, because it made me really a lot more resilient and a lot more appreciative of the world and like what the world has to offer, and kind of like we were saying earlier, like seizing opportunities and doing things because you want to do them. I think it really put a lot of that in perspective for me, whether I realised that at the time or not.
Yeah.
And going through that experience really helped shape me in that sense, which was good.
Yeah, and I suppose it kind of not forced you, but always kind of led you into being comfortable in your own body as well. And I think, that happened with me. I didn't get prosthetic because I was already like, it doesn't matter, But as a 15-year-old at that time, it kind of forces you to kind of look at yourself and go, no, this is me, this has happened to me.
Take it or leave it.
Take it or leave it type of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. We had a guest on who was also a gay man, and he found it as well that the prosthetic thing, he didn't get one, but there was always a talk he maybe get one because he felt that even within the gay community there was a lot of kind of body shaming and things like that. Is that something that you maybe experienced with that?
Oh, 100%.
Right.
100%. There's definitely been times where I've been chatting to people, whatever, and then they'll like mention it or something like that, and then they're just a bit like, oh, like, oh, that's weird, or that's unusual, or like blah blah blah. So there is like a lot, like body shaming happens everywhere. Like it's just a part of society, which is horrific. It should never be the case. But in the gay community, it's really, really prevalent, just in any aspect, whether you're like a little bit chunkier or like you're a bit too skinny or any sort of thing. But yeah, definitely it's something I've experienced is in like that gay community, having the one ball, people are just like, and kind of turn their nose down at it a little bit in a way, which is such a bizarre reaction to have, especially like because I've been chatting to someone and I blatantly say, oh, like I've only got one because of this. And they're just a bit like, oh, like, why are you turning your nose down at that?
Yeah.
That's such a weird thing to be judgmental about.
Yeah. And I find that interesting as well because like, and obviously, like within it being within the media and everything that it is and the way that we talk about like bodies and stuff now, it's all about body positivity, but the fact that still exists, and like you say, body shaming exists everywhere, and there's probably straight guys and we'll be talking to a girl and she'll do the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
But it's interesting that it's so prevalent within the gay community as well.
Yeah, body shaming in the kind of gay queer community is very prevalent, and I see a lot of discourse about it on like Twitter or X or whatever it's called now, and like Instagram and stuff like that. And it's always the people that are boasting about like, oh, like we're all one society, like we're all one community, blah blah blah. But then they'll be like the first to judgment. It's very similar to how it's always like the heterosexual men that are like, oh, men's mental health matters, blah blah blah. But then will like viscerally attack gay men in like the comment sections and stuff like that, and like, oh, being gay is not okay, blah blah blah. I'm like, oh, well, what happened to men's mental health?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It's very similar to that. Like they'll be the first to be like, oh, we're all one community and like we're all together. But then as soon as they see something that they're not classing as like the social norm or like conventionally attractive or something like that, they'll be like, oh.
Yeah.
And it's like, why? Just, it's nothing to do with you. Like everyone comes in different shapes and sizes, and that's great. If everyone was a carbon copy of themselves, life would be boring.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? That's one thing I've always said. If we were all looked the same, acted the same, had the same experiences, whatever, like there'd be no depth to the world.
Yeah.
There'd be nothing about it. It'd just be boring.
And these people are probably the most insecure people as well. You know,
it's the projection.
Yeah, it's just like no, this is going on you because I don't want to talk about how maybe I feel and look about myself as well.
Yeah, it's deflection, it's projection, and it's just like do some self-reflection on yourself and figure out what your problem is before you start harping on about something that isn't even a problem with other people.
Yeah,
like there's no need to be commenting on someone's weight, their appearance, their whether or not they've got one bulb. Why are you commenting on it? It's not nothing to do with you. It's nothing wrong with it. Just get over it.
Yeah, it doesn't hurt anybody. Somebody being the way they are, it literally doesn't hurt you.
It has literally no effect on anybody else.
Yeah.
And I think it's such a shame because although like we talk about and then one bulb very openly and things like that, it could be something that some people are still really insecure about, even though they're talking about it openly. To have those open conversations, they might still be really insecure. Like that was the case for me when I was in my late teens. I didn't shy away from the fact that I only had one ball, was very open to talking about it, but was still very insecure about it, especially because my scar was still quite prominent, and like if I'd see it in the mirror or something like that, I'd be like it would just bring that kind of dread in. But it didn't shy me away from talking about it. But if someone was to negatively comment about it, that would send me into an emotional tailspin.
Yeah.
And just really knock me 5 steps back with my mental health. I think it really just, you don't know what's going on behind closed doors in people's minds. Yeah. So just don't say anything.
I know, and it's that way as well. That you, as you know, somebody who as Scottish people, we do this quite a lot, and it's that self-deprecation. So I'll make the joke before somebody else does, you know, or try. And there's a guy who has reached out to the charity. Lovely guy, typical kind of West of Scotland bloke, like hard a bit of kit, but is so embarrassed now that he only has one testicle. And you would never think that, you know, somebody, you know, it's quite kind of, when you talk to him, really gregarious and quite like, you know, confident and self-assured, but actually when you get down to the nitty-gritty, he's consumed by embarrassment and, you know, and actually can't bring himself to make the jokes because he doesn't feel that he's in that space to do that. And it's interesting when you see that dynamic happen.
I think when I've spoken to people about it in the past, over the last few years, there seems to be this stigma that because you've now only got the one ball, you're less than a man.
Yep.
I think that's a really prominent stigma with it that I've came across quite a few times since the start of my journey, which is just, it's such a shame that society's kind of perpetuated that in a way, because it's came from somewhere that this is the narrative. Like it's not just willy-nilly people thinking that. This is stemmed from somewhere like, oh, you're less than a man of this, blah blah blah. And it's not the case, like, at all. Like, yeah, the jokes, especially like if you're really frustrated, you might feel uncomfortable with them and things like that, or like you don't want to make those jokes because you don't know how people are going to perceive them and things like that. But it all comes from that place of fear, and that I think that stigma that you're somehow less of someone, less of a man, you're less full because you've not got your whole manhood or whatever, which just isn't the case at all. It's very much, if anything, it makes you more than, like, you've went through this journey, you've came out of it the other side, you've came out stronger, you've came out more kind of resilient, you're not better in a way, but you've just got that different life experience, and you've went through this challenge that not very many people go through. Well, not very many people, but less people than you'd go through. And it doesn't mean you're less of a man at all. Like, you're still at the exact same space that you were. You don't have one. Well, that's the only thing that's missing, is that you've not lost any of your manhood. You've not lost any you shouldn't have lost any self-respect between your peers and things like that, or in society, but there's still that narrative that there is, in a way, and it's less prominent now, I think, in that kind of narrative that you're less than, but there is still that kind of niggling away, like those self-proclaimed alphas. Mm-hmm. Those are the sort of people that would be like, oh, you're less of a man, blah, blah, blah. And because I think social media really can amplify their voices in a way, like there's so many of those self-proclaimed alphas and whatnot that their social media is always booming and everyone's always like agreeing with them. And I'm like, you're perpetuating this completely societally wrong narrative and way of thinking and way of treating people that just isn't compassionate, isn't nice. It's just horrid. Yeah. There's just no need for it.
I know, and you found that quite a lot in the conversations that we've had, and the kind of one that sticks out, and it's actually like my cousin Neil. Mm-hmm. Like he was a guest in the show, didn't have testicular cancer but lost a testicle, and has been a big supporter of Cahonas. But he said the same thing, after he lost that one, he felt like he was less of a man. Like when folk asked him to do stuff, he felt, but I'm not a full man. Mm-hmm. It took him a long time to get over that, mm-hmm. because, like you say, societally, like for whatever reason, masculinity is tied to testicles. And you're like, it's just a set of balls.
This is the thing as well, and I think because there's such kind of prevalent conversations about trans people at the moment and stuff like that as well, there's such a weird obsession with people's genitals. I don't get it. Like, your genitals don't make you who you are, and there's just this weird obsession with that, and I just don't understand it. Like, oh, only having one ball makes you less of a man, and blah blah blah. And I'm like, what? Yeah, it just doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah,
there's just this weird obsession with it. Like when there's the conversations about kind of trans women and stuff like that. Like, trans women aren't women because they've got these genitals. Like blah blah blah. They don't have the female genitals. They have the male genitals. I'm like, why are you so obsessed with people's genitals? It's nothing to do with it. Just shut up.
Yeah. You don't see them anyway, so why do you have to talk about them?
Why are you so obsessed with other people's genitals? Like, it's a very bizarre thing to be obsessed with.
Yeah.
I don't understand it.
I think Freud would have a really great thing to say on the
I'd love if Freud was still alive. He'd be like chatting about it and be like, what? I remember I saw this doctor speaking about it on, and I think it must have been it was on Instagram or something recently. And it was like a doctor that specialises in like gender reassignment and stuff like that. And he was basically just being like, if you're not a doctor, keep your mouth shut. Like, you don't know what you're talking about. This isn't your area of expertise, it's mine. And what I'm saying is that you're wrong. Shut up.
Yeah, you wouldn't do the same thing to somebody who's a heart surgeon or a brain surgeon.
Yeah, yeah.
You wouldn't have the same input.
No,
to that.
It's such a weird societal phenomenon that's really, I think, skyrocketed in the last few years. Like, everyone's just like obsessed with what's in everybody's pants, and I'm like, why? Yeah, it's so bizarre.
I know.
It's so strange, and it's like, to anyone listening that it's going through kind of testicular cancer and is feeling like it somehow makes them less of a man. No, it doesn't. Yeah. Not in the slightest. It makes you a survivor.
Yeah.
It makes you strong. It makes you having gone through something and came out the other end, and you'll have that experience and it'll make you more resilient, but it doesn't make you anything less than.
No.
No.
And like you say, you know, you are more than, because you have gained a fresh perspective that, like you say, you know, the majority of the world aren't going to yet. Cancer diagnoses happen every day, but in terms of the kind of the percentage wise of the population, you know, it's you do have a different perspective on things
absolutely.
as well. And it's when you mentioned about kind of trans women as well, I'd read one of your posts as well, and at the kind of the tail end of it, you talked about trans women and don't be scared. You know, if you're scared to talk about your testicles, and just make sure you check, even though that you could be scared or not confident. And I've talked about this before when I was working in IMS.
Yeah.
And for my perception, a young lady came in and sat down, and it had M on her thing. I was
Like
like,
her form.
I better say to the nurse in charge, we can get that changed. And she was like, no, I'm actually a trans woman. I was like, okay. And then I had my Cahonas wristband on, and we were chatting away. And what she had said to me then was that it's strange for me to think about my testicles in that way, because they don't feel part of me.
Yeah.
And that was her thought on it, was that my testicles aren't mine. So to think about them in a way to do checks is something that I find almost alien.
Yeah.
And I suppose my question, you know, as somebody who is, you know, a trans right activist, and really, and you are quite comfortable in that space, and for somebody who's considered a dinosaur now, is Cahonas, especially Cahonas, like as a testicular cancer awareness charity, it's how do we reach out and use the correct language in and around, you know, the trans spaces, and especially when it comes to testicular cancer awareness? Is there something that we could be doing more or better?
I think it's so tough, because there's no way to please anyone, no way to please everyone, sorry. So I think just by using that gender inclusive language, so it's like, it's very similar to like a lot of kind of women's charities, and like I work with a charity, it's like it's a yoga studio and stuff like that, and they have like kind of women's only classes and things like that, and their spaces like women or those who identify as women, blah blah blah. I think using that language so that it does make it more inclusive. So for like testicular being like men, or just saying those with testicles, like, do you know what I mean? Like, rather than kind of pigeonholing it to men or whatever, just being like those who have testicles, it's important to do those checks and things like that. So just making the way you approach people as more broad rather than kind of pigeonholed, I think is the better way to do it. Like, when I am addressing a whole bunch of people, like if I'm doing a lecture, if I'm doing a talk or something like that, if I'm addressing a whole bunch of people, I'll try to refrain from saying ladies and gentlemen or those sorts of things. I'll be like folks or all or something like that. Something that doesn't really have a kind of gendered term to it. You know, like, oh, hey guys, things like that. You know how like you always, like when you get into a bunch of friends and you see them, you're like, oh, hey guys, how's it going, blah, 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 whether it's a bunch of guys or a bunch of girls or whatever. So like using those terms that's just like, hey folks, hey friends, hey people, whatever, to just really broaden out who you're talking to, I think is kind of a really great way to do it. So yeah, just being like those who have testicles or those who could suffer from testicular cancer and things like that. I think it's very similar to how they've kind of now been approaching breast cancer, because I think years ago it used to be like, oh, women get your breast checks, but it's more and more common and more discussed that men get breast cancer as well. So I think the way that they've changed their language around that, being like, oh, it's important just to do these checks for all and things like that.
Right.
That's a really kind of interesting way to take it, and the best way to do it, that I would kind of say.
Yeah, and especially, you know, like you say, you know, breast cancer have done a really good job at kind of using that inclusive language as well. And there was actually somebody who, I think it was, what he was one of the kind of board members at Glasgow Warriors, and he's sadly passed away now, but he had both breast and testicular cancer. And, you know, and it's when guys don't know that it's breast tissue, it's not, you have to have boobs, it's about the tissue,
it's about the muscle and the tissue. Absolutely.
So and I do try that, especially when I go into schools, you know, and I'm giving those talks, and so much more kids are more and more comfortable in their sexuality and their gender identity, whereas I remember putting that question out to the school, if anybody's got any feedback, and there was a couple of the kids that came up and was like, no, I really found the fact that you said, like, people with testicles, I found that really refreshing and things like that. So it's good that, you know, if we're going down the right positive path in terms of language, and again, you'll get people who will go like, oh, it's testicular cancer, you know, why do you have to say, you know, it's like, because you can't not be inclusive at all.
Exactly.
You know? Because see, me doing my job, I want everybody who has testicles to get checked early, so their diagnosis is caught early. So if I am not inclusive in that, then
you're not reaching
I'm not reaching everybody. And then you could have somebody who go, I'm not going to listen to what that charity says because they don't incorporate me as a person.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, I'm not recognised as a person within that space. So
I think that what you just said is really important, is recognising that there is those people, and there is those kind of trans women that haven't had their kind of gender reassignment surgery yet, that it's still important for them to be doing those checks and things like that. Although I think it might very well be very uncomfortable for them, and more than often it probably will be, because like you said, it will feel alien to them. It doesn't feel part of their body, and I'm absolutely sympathetic to that. Like my partner, he's trans, he's female to male, so I can totally get how it feels not part of your body, and it feels alien. And I guess in a way, by kind of having it always thought about, there's always that element of gender dysphoria, which isn't great in the slightest, but it's also still important to do those checks while you're still, before you have your gender reassignment surgery, before it's important to do those checks, just to make sure that you don't get something. Because like when I got diagnosed, it just came out of the blue. Like, you don't know when it's going to happen. There's never like something that's going to be like, oh, you're going to get cancer in a year, blah, blah, blah. You're never going to know. So it's always important to be doing those checks and making sure you're looking after yourself. It's the same way you look after yourself in any other kind of respect. You look after your heart, you look after your lungs, look after your mind, that sort of thing. It's important to look after all aspects of your body while you have those aspects if you're going for gender reassignment. Yeah,
and especially, you know, and it must be tough, you know, having that thought of, I don't feel like these belong to me because I don't feel like that my body represents who I am, you know. So if somebody's got their testicles but they're like, I don't want them, you know. But if you're getting to the stage where, you know, you're not getting that reassignment surgery, you know, it's so important to continue to check, like you say, because, you know, you don't want to ignore that part. You know, it's a bit like, you know, you can treat it like your pinky toe. You don't really think about your pinky toe, but if you stub it, you're very aware of it.
You're very aware. It's like your ears. I'm never aware of my ears until like I'd like flick it or something like that, or something like buzzes near me or something like that, and I'm like, oh, and then I'm like, oh, my ear's sore now. Do you know what I mean? Like, you're just never aware of certain body parts, and then you're like very aware of them.
Yeah. I suppose just to kind of lighten it up a bit as well, it's like, obviously going through your Instagram and things like that, you're a massive Marvel fan as well.
Massive Marvel fan.
Yeah. So is that something you've always been interested in? You've kind of been reading graphic novels and stuff as a kid and things like that? Yeah,
like for as long as I can remember. I was just saying this to someone recently. I used to collect, back in the day, when you used to get like bi-weekly magazines from W.H. Smith, and it used to come with like a little figure and things like that. You'd have the magazine that would be a bit about the character, and then you get like a little kind of diorama figure. I've got probably about almost 200. They're in my attic at home, just of these that I used to collect when I was a teenager. And I think it's really translated into kind of like my adulthood. Like, I'm a massive Marvel fan, massive collector of things and stuff. And I think, again, this is something that I picked up from therapy, is that I really loved Marvel, and it was so important in like formative years because it was an escapism for me, being able to dive into those stories and those comics and kind of see myself as those characters in certain aspects and things like that was really important. And I think that's why I'm still such a massive fan of it. It's kind of like what we were saying about writing books and having it in that first perspective, being able to put yourself in those situations, just kind of it really helps with that escapism aspect. Like I'm a massive just fan of movies and TV in general. Like my partner, he thinks it's so crazy how I just know like celebrities off the top of my head. Like we'll be watching a TV show that I've already seen. I'm like, oh, this is what happened in this episode, blah, blah, blah. I think it's because I do use that as such an escapism to kind of relax myself in a way.
Yeah.
So I think Marvel's like massive part of that for me.
I find it funny as well, like within like the new cinematic universe, and it's also brought a lot of fans to it. But it's the backlash that sometimes Marvel get when they do like queer storylines and things like that. But see, as somebody who grew up reading graphic novels, I was always aware of, you know, gay and queer storylines within Marvel. It happened all the time. Identity issues happened in Marvel, you know, and they were always very proactive at telling people that as well. But it's always been, no, they're strong superheroes, so that we don't talk about that aspect of it. And for you, that must have been why that escape was so great, because you could see yourself almost represented in those stories. Yeah,
definitely. I think I saw an article about this recently, and it was when they were, I think X-Men 97 had just came out on Disney Plus or whatever, and someone was talking about how X-Men isn't political, blah, blah, blah. I was like, what? Have you ever actually read what, like, the comics or know anything about X-Men? It's such an allegory of kind of political indifference and segregation and those sorts of things. And I'm like, it's always been political, whether you've realised it or not. And I think, people are always like this backlash of like, oh, why do you have to make this character gay? Or like, why have this character in a same-sex relationship? And I'm like, do you know where the source material of this is coming from? Like, this has always been prevalent. You've just been ignorant to it. And now that it's in a format that you're liking, you're just not into it. And I'm like, again, it's just like, it's not affecting you. Grow up. Yeah. Like, that's something I always say. It's like, I don't get why people get so bent out of shape of something that doesn't affect them. Yeah. Like, in the slightest. Like, if you're going to get bent out of shape about something important. Yeah. Climate change. Like, cost of living crisis. Do you know what I mean? Like, talk about something important, not whether or not there's a gay kid on your TV show that you don't like. Yeah. Or when, and I remember this happened, I think it was last year, I think Sainsbury's or someone had an advert of just like a black family and stuff like that in one of their adverts, and there was this whole ruckus being like, this doesn't represent me, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, what are you on about? Yeah. It's like, you've been represented for years. Like, just because what you're seeing you don't like doesn't mean it's not true. That's part of society. That's what society looks like, not just this white heteronormative nonsense. Yeah. But it's typical of that as well. It's like that you get people, you know, forget that the number one food in this country is a chicken tikka masala. You know, we say that we're so inclusive of nationalities, and then, but that it's just those. But unfortunately, the small minority of voices that are now so amplified because of social media, and you know, and that's the problem as well on both sides of the aisle, and that stuff for like, because I remember growing up and watching X-Men, and I was a kind of weird kid. I was always kind of okay in terms of being in, I was like, I wasn't like a super popular kid, but I wasn't like shunned. Yeah. But I never felt like a fit, because I was friends with the kids who were maybe not friends with the popular kids. And when I read X-Men and things like that, it always kind of made me go, well, it's just clearly about, you know, being happy with who you are. It's this collection of people who are going, no, that I'm different and for this reason, and I'm different for that reason. Yeah. And that was always the point of it, I thought. Yeah, absolutely. Know? I think the point of it has always been to celebrate what makes you and what makes you different, and how you're just, like what makes you weird and eclectic and unique and different, like, in celebrating that. I think, X-Men especially is really like a metaphor for that. And I was the same in high school. I was like, I've always been like a friendly, quite social person. I was friends with the popular kids, and then like, but I wasn't the popular kids and stuff like that and whatnot. But so I was very much the same. And yeah, I think it is really just that massive metaphor. Is like, it's okay to be who you are. There's nothing wrong with it. And but we're still in a societal way where society is still pushing back. We're like, no, there is a problem with it. I'm like no, there's nothing wrong with who you are. Like, you are your own person, and who you are is no one else's business, for one. Like, don't let society define who you are. That's, I literally have a tattoo that says, I got it when I was probably like 18, 19. It says, society doesn't define us, we define ourselves. It's cheesy, but it's true. Do you know what I mean? Like, we are our own person. It's like what I was saying, if we were all carbon copies, the life would be boring. We're all different for a reason. We're all unique for a reason. And there's no need to be conforming to what some amplified voices on the internet that are sitting behind the keyboard are saying. These keyboard warriors and whatnot.
Yeah.
And it's the same as like it just comes back to making you, like, having one ball doesn't make you any less of someone. It's just part of who you are. It's like, it's part of your story, it's part of your life, it's part of your journey. It doesn't make you less than, doesn't make you more than, just makes you you. That's it at the end of the day.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And if you were to pick one Marvel hero as your favourite, is that something you can do, or is it too many?
That's so tough. That's very tough. I love Scarlet Witch. This is probably one of my favourites. I have 2 Scarlet Witch tattoos. I'm a massive fan of Loki.
Yep.
Loki's really big, especially from like a gender bending sort of way, because there's been like male Loki, female Loki, kid Loki, whatever. So they're probably 2 prominent ones, but I would actually probably say Spider-Man as well. Spider-Man was like the face of Marvel for years. Like, especially when I was a kid, I used to watch the Spider-Man comic cartoon from the 90s and things like that. And I still watch it, like, it's on Disney Plus, and I'm like, oh, it's great to just go back and watch that. But to pick like a proper favourite, that's too difficult.
Yeah, too difficult.
Yeah. Those are like some of my top 3 though.
Yeah. It's a good top 3 to have. It is a good top 3 to have. We were really lucky as well. This year we done the Beer Mats for Balls auction, and so it's basically we send out beer mats to artists, and Richie's really good at tracking down and being on Instagram and tracking down. So we had like Marvel artists drawing the beer mats, and one of the ones we got was I'll have to send you the photo of it, and it was a Scarlet Witch line drawing from one of the kind of original Marvel artists as well. So hopefully, in fact, not hopefully, next April we're doing the same thing, and a lot of these artists have came back on board. So we're gonna have a lot of comic book stuff, back in at that point. And we had one artist had done them like Spider-Man, Wolverine, Batman and Thing grabbing their crotch, which is good. And it's great when, again, why these pop culture things are so important, because if somebody sees a picture and it's, say, Spider-Man is their favourite superhero, and then the original artist has drawn this thing that shows them grabbing their testicles or talking about testicular cancer, it again helps amplify our message within that as well.
I think I totally agree with that. I think that's why it's so important that, like, TV shows, movies, and kind of those popular mediums are really opening up those stories to all walks of life and all people and things like that, because that is the world we live in. We should have comics and books and TV shows and movies and whatnot that someone anywhere can find themselves in and can see themselves represented in.
Yeah. Have you seen the TV show Calling from Accounts?
No, but I've heard of it.
Yeah, great show.
It's on my watch list.
Really, really funny. But yeah, watch it, because it does have a kind of a connection to us.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so
I will watch that.
Yeah, it's really. I think the second season's just came out. So
because there's a lot of, because I remember in your episode with Terrence and stuff like that, there's a lot of comedians that are like quite prominent. Like, I was at a comedy show a couple of years ago, and it was someone that had cancer. she'd had breast cancer and stuff like that. But it's a weird amount of comedians that have had that kind of experience and stuff like that. But I think it's so refreshing to see those comedians making light of it and making like that like comedy specials and things like that surrounding it, because it alleviates and like the pressure a little bit and makes you just feel a bit more at ease, like watching those other people having had that experience and making a laugh and joke about it and things like that.
Yeah.
Just makes you feel a bit more like,
yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
I think it's like, when I was working for the NHS, I remember seeing this thing where, and I joked about it on my return to work actually, that, so say for example, night shift is considered as much as a carcinogenic as a firefighter, you know, working with like putting out fires and breathing it and inhalating smoke. And I remember, and the boss was like, "Oh, is that something that's been studied? Do we need to speak to HR?" I'm like, "No, I'm only kidding. Like, I don't really think night shift gave me cancer." But it's, but you wonder though, with things like lack of sleep, and because comedians are on the road, they don't sleep well, they don't eat well. You know, you wonder if that. It was after that episode returns. And obviously we had Michael on as well, and Af, you know, after stand-up comedy. So it's like there's 3 that have already been on the show. You know, I was like, I think I came up with 8 that we're in contact with, and I'm going, you know, you could do the 8-ball comedy tour. You know, yeah, it's like they just have your own wee show.
Yeah, and I think like there's sometimes like not so much now, but definitely like years ago when I would make like jokes about it, and people would just be like, I don't know how to react. Like I would always be like, like if I came into a party or like I remember I went to a party, one of my friends' party at his house, and I was already a little bit drunk because I'd been pre-drinking and whatnot. And I was like, the one ball wonder is here, and everyone was just a bit like, I don't know if I can laugh at that or not. And I'm like, just laugh. I'm making the joke, therefore you can laugh.
Yeah.
Like it's fine to laugh if the person's making the joke about it, and it also depends on the context. Like because sometimes people will make a joke about it, and you're like, that was a bit rude. But like if you're making the joke, it's fine. Like the cancerogenic thing you said, like I remember when I was in high school, so I was in 6th year, and so it was about 2 years after my diagnosis and my surgery and whatnot, and it was higher chemistry, and my teacher was like, "Oh, who likes the smell of petrol?" And like there was only 5 of us in the class, and we were like, he's like, "Oh right, well I'm just gonna say this, and I'm sorry to say this, Chris." And he like deadpan looked at me, and I was like, where's this going? He's like, but the smell of petrol's actually like a cancerogenic. And I was just like, okay, why am I being singled out? I know why I'm being singled out, but like, don't single me out. Like, come on.
And don't make it look like I sniff petrol.
Yeah, like being like, do you know what I mean? It's just like, and I was like, that didn't feel right, but okay. But if I was to make that joke, I'd be like, that's fine.
Yeah, and then you get the opposite of that. You get people who make the joke flippantly, and then minutes later, look, I'm so sorry I said that.
Mm-hmm.
And
I'm like,
it's okay.
It's fine. Like I laughed at it. It's fine. It was funny. Like it's great. Like I've had people that like friends or like friends' partners and stuff like that. Like that they'll find out that I've got one ball and be like, I want to see it. Like they're so intrigued by it. They're like, oh, that's such an unusual thing. Can I see? And I'm like, no, but I appreciate asking and I appreciate your inquisitivity. But I've not had enough tequila for that, so no.
I always find it funny when you say to people who don't know as well, or it comes up in conversation, and it's the sudden look to the crotch.
Yeah.
As well, they're
just like,
it's like up here.
Yeah, they're just like, what? And I'm like, yeah. They're like, where does it hang? And I'm like, just hangs. You know what I mean?
I call it my middle ball now. You know?
Just, you know, like never just like someone's like, oh, how's it hanging? And I'm like, pretty centered, pretty central.
Short, shriveled, and always to the left.
Exactly.
But so, and I suppose then, you know, in a kind of almost rounding up type of way, looking back on your experience, and not just as, you know, like being so young, but like your whole experience in dealing with every aspect of what you were going through at that time of your life, if you could talk to yourself or give advice to somebody who potentially has gone through the exact same kind of experience as you, what advice would you give to that person that's gone through that?
I think the advice I would probably have gave myself or gave someone that was going through an exact same situation as I went through is like, it will all work out the way it's supposed to. You'll be okay. You'll get through it. You'll be stronger for it. But it's okay to not be strong all the time. I think that was the biggest thing for me, is like I felt that I needed to be strong and independent and take it in its stride and things like that. And I think that's another thing with society, is that it's okay to break down a little bit. It's okay to be sad. It's okay to cry about it. I think that's another thing, especially with men. It's okay to cry. Like, this is like folklore in news. It's okay to be a bit upset about it. You don't need to put on a brave face for anybody, let alone yourself. So I think what I would say to me is, it's okay to feel the feelings, but it'll all be okay and it'll all work out the way it's supposed to, and you'll be better for it. And whether it takes a few months or a few years, you'll come to terms with who you are, and you'll be thankful for it in a way.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you so much for coming down and joining us on this today. And it's great to have so many different voices tell us their testicular cancer story as well. So I'm really appreciative that you came down, and I've thoroughly enjoyed the day. You know what I mean?
So have I. Thank you very much.
I think we probably could have done another hour on just talking about Marvel right enough. But
oh yeah, definitely. That's a different podcast.
Definitely. But yeah, thanking you.
No, thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Cheers.